Hey, what is the true cost of freedom? That's the question we're going to be answering today. Throughout centuries of mankind, wars have been had. Injuries to the brain and spine are no small part of those wars. And that's what we're getting in tonight. What it truly costs in terms of brain and spine health, injuries to the core parts of the body that make you who you are, that happen during war. We're going to be talking about that tonight and what the true impact of freedom really means. We'll be right back. And we're live. All right. So let's get into it. But before we do, how you doing today, Josh?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a busy day at work. We're working hard, getting brain and spine group positioned as not just a leader, but an ally in the future of brain and spine health. We got all kinds of stuff moving and shaking behind the scenes. I'm excited for it. What about you? How's work? How's life? How's the family? How's your brain? How's your spine?
I think my brain's fine. Work's busy as ever, so I can't complain.
Definitely not. I can attest. Your brain is flawed, my friend. I'm just kidding.
But no, everything's good. Busy, life gets busy, comes at you fast, but it makes doing this so much more enjoyable because I enjoy it. It's always good conversations.
Busy life is good life. Nobody wants to sit around doing nothing all day like Steve.
That's
we
true.
all know Steve doesn't watch the stream, so he'll never know that we're making fun of him. Anyway, everyone out there, welcome to the stream. Thanks for being with us. We're glad you joined. Go ahead, give us a thumbs up, a hello, a wave in the chat. We'd love to see it. If you have questions throughout the stream, we're talking about a really interesting topic tonight. It's really all the brain, spine, gruesome injuries of war, everything from old school hand-to-hand combat to some of the newer things, obviously IEDs, bombs related to more modern warfare. And then obviously, I guess we could get into the really true, less thought about brain and spine effects of war, like psychological warfare. I saw this crazy clip on YouTube. I don't know, just last week or the week before, apparently like from the 80s, some like Russian KGB defector talking about how Russia has this long-term psychological warfare plan against the United States to basically brainwash over a course of 20 years, a generation of American citizens into basically thinking nothing matters, everything's irrelevant, and demoralizing the entire U.S. population through psychological warfare. I don't know. Maybe we're seeing the effects of that. People seem kind of brainwashed these days. Maybe it's just truly the Russian KGB attacking the United States. I don't know.
Man,
we're getting into it all.
I spent the weekend quoting Rounders quotes from the KGB guy. Have you ever seen Rounders? So the second you said KGB,
I have not. School me up, my friend.
Oh man, it's played by John Malkovich in Rounders. Plays a Russian guy, KGB, whatever his name is, don't remember. But his Russian accent is phenomenal. And I highly recommend you go watch it for that alone. Classic movie, but the performance is wonderful. So that's all that's going through my head now. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure.
Completely off topic.
Everything's on the table for tonight. Everything's on the table, from the stuff we spend tons of our stream talking about. Traumatic brain injury, obviously, is a huge part of the recent conflict in Afghanistan. Some of the research and literature I've been reviewing in preparation for tonight is kind of focused more around that. But I think really anything's on the table, from spinal cord injury, which is, to my understanding, we can kind of talk about this a little bit more common among like special forces and people in those specialties that do a lot of parachuting, a little parajumping. Tends to lead to spinal cord injuries, which I think is kind of interesting. Obviously, there's other factors to consider there. But anything all the way down to psychological warfare, the psychological effects of war. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. So why don't we get right into some questions? Is there anything like burning you want to jump into and talk about, Norty?
Man, this is such a unique topic because I think there's a lot of injuries that people don't think about, and then not only how do they all intertwine, but what are some of the long lasting effects that people
Yeah.
don't think of from our injured veterans? To be honest, people think about physical injuries, but what about the injuries that you can't see, whether it be a traumatic brain injury or it be something more psychological? I believe you talked about some of this stuff with Mike, Mike number one.
Yeah, we got a lot of
Earlier.
Mikes around here. Mike H.
I
Yeah.
mean, let's talk about, because obviously you're a veteran, so if anything, you said anything's on the table, but if anything's too sensitive or we should steer clear of, just let me know. But that being said, I mean, I feel like let's start with IEDs, people getting concussions.
I mean, that's the big one we talk about all the time. And I think in my professional life, having a personal interest in these things, using my professional education and experience to read and learn more about these things, I think the most impactful thing that I've learned is how little of an insult or a blast or anything it really takes to have a mild form of brain injury, and it doesn't take a bullet to the head just to have a brain injury, right? Obviously, something like that can cause very severe brain injury, but it doesn't. It's not. Brain injuries are not just those severe things, right?
Well, that's the thing that I think is so interesting and what people forget about. And I don't want to take away from the severity of other injuries of war, but concussions from blast, and like you just mentioned, it can affect so many people and have so many long-term effects, some of which we've talked about on previous streams, some maybe we haven't fully dove into, but it's something you don't even think about when you're thinking of war, because you think of the more drastic ones, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's important to dive into that, like you just touched on. It's something where you don't have to be overly close. It can happen multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's something that I just feel like almost goes unnoticed, because you've got people losing limbs and things of that nature, that you forget about the, I don't want to call them less severe injuries, but
Less apparent injuries.
less apparent injuries. That's a
I
good
think
word.
apparent is like a really good word, right?
Yeah,
And
that's perfect.
obviously, I'm kind of looking around. I'm trying to pull up an article here. Let me just find it on my computer so that I can quote some things that are a little more concrete data. But just in these post 9, so one of the articles I was reviewing in preparation for this evening was looking at neurologic injury, specifically in the post 9/11 veterans, right? Not obviously, if you look at a whole population of veterans, we've got, Vietnam veterans that are still living. I think most World War II veterans have passed by this point. I think I remember seeing an article. I mean, there's a very small number, if any, World War II veterans still living.
Yeah, I feel like I saw something like one of the last surviving
Yeah.
U.S. military, at least. I could be
Yeah.
wrong, but I feel like I've seen a lot of stuff like
In the recent news, like last couple of years, I saw something like one of the last few surviving people. I mean, I think it was 19. Yeah, there's probably more than just a few out there if you do the math in terms of Anyway, but the point is the numbers are dwindling of World War II veterans. Obviously Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm 1, there's a lot more living. There's plenty of living veterans still. And then we have this huge sort of anomalous group of post 9/11 veterans that are, in many ways, we're just starting to kind of wrap our heads around the data that sort of informing us about this population of veterans. And part of that is, one, this is a veteran population who, in the grand scheme of history, has the best data available, right? Electronic health records, electronic data collection, big data came into existence in parallel to this veteran population. So a lot of the differences that we assess between prior veteran populations and post 9/11 veteran populations, something you have to factor in is that there's a lot of technology and data that is known about these more modern veterans that maybe there are things that aren't necessarily different between older veterans, but we just didn't have the data to indicate that we even can track this or know this. And so this paper is actually estimating, the estimates range anywhere from like 9 to 28% of post 9/11 veterans have TBIs, which is, 9% doesn't sound like a lot. 28%, that's almost a third.
Yeah.
A third of veterans, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's
I saw that number too when you shared that article with me. And I was like, it's a differing number. Both are pretty high, I would say. But it makes sense. And a third is
9% to me is like, makes sense. A third is absurd to me. I mean, I just think about like the guys that I was deployed with. I mean, I think about all of us standing around in formation in the motor pool, getting ready for the chief warrant officer to come out and tell us about, I don't know, some BS that the commanding officer is sending down, like, hey, you guys got to make sure you shave twice a day while you're in the middle of a war. Like, something stupid like that. And then you cut that formation in thirds, and 1/3 of us has a traumatic brain injury. And that sounds crazy.
And what are they classifying as a traumatic brain injury? So if somebody's like, are they talking just concussions? Are they talking something more severe? Like,
I mean, yeah, concussion is considered a mild traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
Right. So literally anything from a concussion to a severe traumatic brain injury. I think at the time, those of us standing around in Afghanistan kind of only really saw severe traumatic brain injury as like truly being a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
But I've said this, I think, a handful of times on the stream, that I think around 2012, 2010, 2012 timeframe, the DoD started recognizing that any military member within 50 yards of a blast needs to be screened for TBI. So when I was in Afghanistan, that was prior to this policy.
Well, that's what I was thinking about when you were going over the data. Is this is such a good group to study that post 9/11, because that is around the time where TBIs were actually being considered for, when brain injuries, I feel like we're starting to become, at the very least, talked about. And like you said, like 50 yards of a blast of any kind, like needs to be evaluated for that, or is considered to have been close enough to have a traumatic brain injury. I mean, that's pretty close, especially with the type of warfare that was going on over there.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and you think of it, like, that wasn't recognized until the 2011, 12, 13, 14 timeframe. So the war, with the war starting 2001, that's a decade of combat before we even start recognizing that TBIs need to be screened for within 50 yards of a blast. So basically, that means for 10 years, when you had people getting blown up, it was really just the people in the principal incident, not the surrounding blast area, being screened and treated for traumatic brain injury.
Well, I wonder if that's why there's that varying number from 9 to 28% or whatever it was, right? Are they extrapolating it maybe, or because they said they're estimating?
Yeah, well, everything's an estimate, right?
Because again, with that type of, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to where it did almost affect a third of people serving in that time frame.
And I think that's exactly the point, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's the higher end of the estimates are highlighting the fact that we don't even truly understand how many veterans' brains are affected by the things that have happened in Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 20 years.
Well, and that leads me to the next thing, and it's not a good thing for these veterans. But didn't they say there's like a crazy increase in suicide rates as well from the veterans in that time frame?
Yeah, massive. Yeah. Let's see if we can find the actual. Well, because basically, so this is an interesting concept, actually. I thought this was a really cool concept that this paper was talking about. When they've looked at prior cohorts of veterans, and this is kind of getting into the like pre-big data, pre-9/11 veteran cohorts versus post-9/11 existence of big data, technology, infrastructure, that in general, they found the mortality of pre-9/11 veterans to be lower than the general population, right? So the general population, they have, there's a baseline level of mortality, right? How many people in different age groups are dying every year for whatever the reason.
Right.
So car accidents, drugs, natural disease,
Yeah.
whatever. There's a baseline level in the population. And what they've seen in the previous literatures, like when you look at, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, all these prior cohorts of veterans, the general rate of mortality was lower than the average population. And people said, well, why is that the case? They said, well, because the military is rigorously screening these people. These are people that are in good health, good physical condition. They're, prime human specimens.
Like myself, yeah.
Yes, like yourself, not like Steve, because Steve is probably just a fat ginger. If I had to guess, I don't know.
It's accurate.
But I suspect he's probably just a fat ginger. If he's out there listening, I hope he is.
His ears are ringing if he's not.
If not, yeah, his ears are definitely tingling right now. His spidey senses are tingling. He's like, somebody's talking smack about me. The thought was like, veterans are a highly screened population. They must be just generally healthier, which to me is actually kind of hilarious, considering veterans like smoke, drink, and dip like no other human being on this earth. But somehow, I guess all the physical fitness and all that kind of stuff generally, preserves our lifeline a little bit.
What's the old adage? You can definitely outwork a bad diet. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
I mean, seemingly prior cohorts of veterans prove this is true. However, I think something else to consider is, and this was not talked about in the article, this is just something I thought about. If you consider the general change in the population between these veteran cohorts, right? So you think about like the world wars, Vietnam, Korea. I'm trying to think of other conflicts that I may not be thinking of.
Cold War?
Those are obviously the big ones. Anyway, but like at the time that these conflicts were happening, the general health of the American population was pretty poor. They all chain smoked. They all chewed. They all drank.
We didn't know what we do about food and diet.
Children. Yep. Yeah. I mean, people were probably eating, not as much McDonald's and stuff like that way back when.
Yeah. Less organic and free range chickens going on back in the day. That much. But it's probably true.
Honestly, back then things probably were like mostly organic, right? You had like freedom gardens and stuff. People like growing their own tomatoes and stuff during World War II to make sure that, the American economy could stay afloat or whatever. I don't know. Freedom gardens, is that a World War I or World War II thing? I don't know. Fact check that for us, Carlos, if you're around. So I think there's a general idea or general concept that like the difference between the general population and the veteran population in terms of healthy lifestyle practices were probably less different way back then. Yeah. Right. Everybody during World War II was chain smoking. That wasn't like a thing that just veterans were doing. Whereas you go fast forward to post 9/11, now the general population is caught on to the fact that like smoking causes cancer, dipping causes jaw cancer, all this kind of stuff. And the general population, Victory Gardens. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Victory Gardens, War Gardens,
Food Gardens for defense.
Okay, it was both World War I and World War II. So I was, there we go. So people were growing their own food to help support the American economy during the world wars. But the point is, post 9/11, I think the general population caught up in terms of, smoking's bad for you, dipping's bad for you, drinking alcohol is bad for you outside of like moderate portions. Whereas like veterans were just like, YOLO, like I could die tomorrow. I'm just going to smoke as much as I want, dip as much as I want. Like, I don't care. I'm in the best physical shape of my life. I'm here to kill Taliban. Like, I have no concern about dying to like oral cancer anytime soon in my life. I could die tomorrow by stepping on a bomb. And probably for that reason, you saw the general population improve in overall health, while the mean health of the veteran population supposedly, I presumably, is not all that different than, the healthy lifestyle practices of World War II veterans. That's my personal take on that matter. So I think that's one of the reasons why this contrast where you saw that pre 9/11 veterans were actually considered healthier than the general population versus post 9/11 veterans, which are largely being deemed less healthy, more likely, higher mortality rate than the general population. That's one sort of thing to consider there, which I don't know if that's true, but I think it's an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point for that case. It is definitely something to consider when looking at all this data. It struck me that just seeing specifically suicide rates go up.
Well,
That's
actually,
what I thought.
yeah. Well, there was a lot of interesting points I thought they brought up about that in this manuscript. A bunch of things to consider. One, medical care has drastically improved from war to war. So the veterans that were getting emergent medical care and surviving in Iraq and Afghanistan, probably a significant number of those individuals were literally just dead in the world wars in Korea and Vietnam. Like they literally just couldn't be saved.
Right.
And so when you're saving the lives of more, basically when you're saving the lives of more trauma victims, you're going to see a higher number of trauma survivors surviving into the long-term population. And possibly what we're just seeing are the downstream effects of surviving trauma. Whereas perhaps if those same people survived in the world wars, Korea, Vietnam, and we were able to follow them long term, they weren't literally dead on the battlefield, perhaps the suicide rates would be more similar.
Well, because that is something I definitely considered, right? Is this just going up because there's more surviving people, or
Possibly.
perhaps like the nature of the combat that was happening and the people witnessing things they may not have witnessed in other wars? I don't know. Or is it something to where we're learning more that TBIs can cause these type of shifts in personality as well as depression, suicide? Like again, we go back to the article about the football player where he became a different person, right, from traumatic brain injury. So is it the increased in traumatic brain injuries? Is it just simply surviving trauma? Like you had mentioned, there's a lot to unpack there. And it goes back to the cause of your organization is finding out more, right, as well as getting help for these surviving veterans and people with brain injuries in general. There's a lot we need to know, and there's a lot other than just apparent injuries going on.
Yeah. I mean, the suicide rate among veterans is clearly of primary concern to surviving veterans right now. I think the hard part is really answering the question of what do you do about it? There's a lot of different people taking a lot of different approaches to veteran suicide.
I mean, personally, I do think that the first step is talking about it and getting more people to talk about it.
Yes.
And having support for veterans or anybody, right? Like I think personally, like I'm very passionate about this. I think we've discussed this. Like this is something that needs to be talked about baseline so we can have a better understanding. And that's why I love what you do. I think it's a good time to plug what you do and the
That's a good point.
nonprofit,
Yeah.
you know, and then we'll get into the details of it more.
So anyway, we'll take a pause in the conversation talking about veteran and military death, injury, and obviously post-combat suicide to just say thank you to everybody joining us. You know, we are a nonprofit organization, Brain and Spine Group. We're committed to improving brain and spine health globally. So if you're just meeting us for the first time, we want to kind of tell you a little bit about what we do. We are supporters of not just military and veterans, but really all patients with brain and spine injuries. But obviously myself as a veteran, I keep, a strong focus of the organization on keeping specific programs and services available to helping veterans with brain and spine injuries, which includes both, PTSD and the psychiatric effects of the brain, not just the traumatic brain injuries. And the way we're able to do that as a nonprofit organization is through the support of our community. And right now we're running a fundraiser in order to provide the funds needed to continue these support programs for veterans and military. You can scan the QR code in the chat over, I guess, this way. This way, you can text PSG to 44321 if you'd like to support our fundraiser for military and veterans. And by doing that, you're helping us create an environment where veterans can talk to one another, but also talk to other veterans who have become physicians, and they can get healthcare information and questions directly asked to veterans who are to physicians who are also veterans, who can connect with them in a way that it's really hard to understand a doctor or talk to a doctor who doesn't understand the experience that you had as a veteran. So that's one of the things we're really committed to with these programs. Now, obviously, we do so much more than that. We have tons of education, tons of community engagement. Obviously, we do our live streams 3-4 times a week, even sometimes. And we do tons of research as an organization. If you would like to support what we do, you can go ahead and click the link in the chat. You can scan the QR code, text BSG to 44321, join our fundraiser. We've got another week and a half left on this specific fundraiser. We're trying to raise $15,000 by February 15th. So if you can join that fundraiser, we'd greatly appreciate it. On that note, let's go ahead and we got a comment in the chat. We'll go ahead and just hide our screen here a little bit from Jade. Hello from Sweden. Sweden has absolutely amazing medical care for military personnel who've been wounded in battle. That's great to hear.
Awesome.
There's a lot of things that, I really wish we had for our veterans in the United States, but every country, every environment is different. And I think that's one thing that gets missed a lot when people point to smaller countries in Europe or other continents and say, well, how they have a great healthcare system, or they take a great care of their military. And, that's probably true. But you can't compare apples to apples. The United States is a huge country. We have a massive military. We have tons of military members that need to be cared for. And the system is sadly overwhelmed. And that's why we rely on nonprofit organizations such as ourselves to help add to, supplement, and augment the need of military. So let's see our next comment here. Swedish definition of a veteran is that you have been deployed out of country. Then it doesn't matter if you've been engaged in combat or just wanted the flowers at the base. Well, in many ways, U.S. military, we consider anybody who's served in the military, deployed or non-deployed, a veteran. Obviously, we have at the end of military service, every military veteran undergoes healthcare evaluation. And if you've been deemed to suffer any sort of injury or illness or disease related to your military service, the federal government assigns you a disability rating, and that disability rating stays with you for life. It can potentially go up if your conditions get worse, but it can never go down. And that disability rating that you have for life from the federal government dictates the extent to what types of veteran benefits you do or do not have access to. Obviously, somebody with what we consider 100% disability, meaning the government has determined that their disability from service is so severe that they get 100% of the available benefits, pretty much get like full health care, everything needed for free. Now, that sounds great on paper, but the problem is sometimes the full health care that they get for free is not always the best quality health care. And that's a different issue of the United States healthcare system, where you have private versus public healthcare providers. And that's a whole different topic for another episode, another day. But that's sort of how things work here. Thanks for sharing how things work over in Sweden. It's nice to hear from the audience.
Yeah, great to get input and learn that. And it's great for comparisons. I think you touched on a lot of good points. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, is how do we start addressing this? Because it is getting to the point where, I'm watching TV, I'm seeing commercials for gun safety for veterans, right? Like, so it's getting talked about more. It's clearly a big enough issue to where we're promoting it. So like what else can be done about it from your perspective?
I don't know. Before I answer that question, you want to take on Jade's question here?
Yeah. So federal is above all the states, plus government is on a state by state basis.
I think what he's asking is
the healthcare.
He or she, who I don't know. I think in general they're asking about federal versus state level government in the United States, because presumably that doesn't exist in Sweden.
What about the federal versus the state government? The healthcare specifically.
I think you're asking like no. I think you're just in general, right? Federal healthcare is like the whole country, like the country's government, federal anything. Whereas state level government only applies to the state that somebody's in. And VA benefits, you have federal level benefits where, like, no matter where in the country you are, you get those benefits based on your rating and your VA status. But you also have state level benefits where your state, like I live in New Jersey, so the benefits that the state of New Jersey gives me as a veteran are not the same that the state of Chicago or Illinois, state of Illinois would give me.
We think Chicago's a state. We're kind of like Texas.
I mean, right? I lived in New York, where like New York City is New York State, so New York is New York, right?
Yeah.
With the state of Illinois has different state benefits. If I move to Illinois, I'll get those benefits, but I don't get Illinois' benefits when I live in New Jersey.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody who has federal benefits, like, they have the same benefits across the board, no matter where they live in the country. But every state creates their own set of basically additional benefits that you get on top of
the normal federal like baseline. Okay.
Yeah. So like in New Jersey, I think I get a tax deduction like when I buy a house or something like that. Like they literally just give me like a fat tax rebate whenever I buy a house or something like that. But that doesn't necessarily exist in Illinois.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Every state's different. I mean, I think New Jersey gives me like free access to like any state park or something like that too. Like you don't have to pay for access.
Okay.
You know, there's all sorts of like weird.
Yeah. Well, see, I know about some of those benefits. I guess I didn't understand that applied to like medical stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, another question. I've been looking into the differences between U.S. and Swedish healthcare. Try really hard to understand it, but I'm certain it has. You're trying to understand U.S. healthcare? Good luck.
Good luck.
The best explanation I've come up with, and the thing is like people say like, you know, all these countries.
Why isn't it just like free healthcare?
Yeah, why isn't it just free? And the thing is, I think if you look at like a smaller country in Europe, it's very hard to compare the United States to that. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but my suspicion is Sweden, being a smaller country than the United States, their population is smaller, their overall healthcare burden is smaller, and probably their population is a little more homogeneous, right? So the heterogeneous nature of the U.S. population, the vast size of the United States as a country, means that everything about our patients is more complicated. And obviously that means the economy is more complicated. The socioeconomics of the country are more complicated. And when you take all these factors, it's not as simple as just, create a healthcare system and the government pays for everything. Because the other thing too about the United States is that the United States, if I'm not mistaken, bears the largest burden in the world of cost of healthcare innovation. And so for that is extremely costly to the healthcare system. In which case it's tough and it's different. Culturally, it's just different. Canada, from maybe not from a population size, but from a vast, obviously, landmass size, is not terribly drastically different from the United States compared to like Sweden and the United States. And you talk to people from Canada and they'll complain about their healthcare system.
There's positives and negatives to everything, right? Like nothing's perfect is the short. Yeah, I think an ER costs like a minimum of like $100 to be honest.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, the problem is, I'd be curious what the general taxes are in Sweden compared to the United States.
Yeah.
Because taxes are not insignificant in the United States. If you run a business in the United States and you run your payroll, you're like my wife's like mind blown every time she runs payroll for her business and the amount she has to pay in taxes. She's like, wait a second, I got to pay taxes to pay my employees, and then my employees have taxes taken out of their paycheck. It's like the federal government does a great job at double dipping on taxes. And then when you go and spend that money, you got to pay sales tax. So there's like taxes on taxes. I don't know. Taxes are higher in Sweden, but you get a lot more at a lower cost in Sweden than in other countries.
Again, positives and negatives to everything.
Yes. I'd be curious though, like what is the quality of the healthcare in Sweden compared to the quality of the healthcare in the United States? I don't know the answer to that question.
Urban, I think one of the big complaints in Canada is like wait times for stuff.
Yeah, people in Canada. Canada obviously has a healthcare system more similar to like Sweden, where it's government funded, and they Canadians complain constantly about like the wait time for healthcare.
Yeah.
I don't know. In the United States, the thing we complain about is insurance companies denying care.
Well, that and cost of everything. Like it's expensive to have health insurance, right?
Well, yeah, it's expensive to have health insurance, and then health insurance doesn't pay for the things that you need done. And then as a doctor, you fight with the health insurance companies to get the care covered that you need for your patients.
I think the craziest thing I ever saw was I tore my ACL. So the repairing surgery for my ACL, getting the bill and seeing like the line itemized cost of everything that goes into that, it was $20,000. It was crazy. It's like those things are.
That's it. $20,000.
$20,000. Yeah.
It
wasn't an overnight stay.
I had a shoulder surgery, laparoscopic shoulder surgery, probably like 12 years ago or so.
Yeah, this was 2009.
Like the itemized bill was like $90,000 or something like that. It was absurdly high. I didn't pay any of it really. I paid like I paid like $1,000. Maybe.
I think I paid $2,000 with my health insurance. I had to pay 10%. I wasn't at my premium.
You look at the bill and it's like
it's crazy to see the
$90,000 for this surgery. That's insane.
Yeah. I think like a bulk of it was like anesthesia too.
Anesthesia is very expensive.
Yeah.
Anesthesia is very expensive. But, the equipment, everything, I don't know. In general, like healthcare, like supplies for healthcare are very expensive.
But that even leads us to this. So like, how do we have other ways outside of support groups to support people, these veterans? Like, how do we lower these suicide rates? How do we even start to chip away at that? Yeah, loop it back in. It's all tied together. Right?
People are trying all kinds of different things.
Right. And again, I like seeing that those ads are out there because this is something that wasn't talked about, in my opinion, like 10 years ago, at least not to the extent that it is today. Like mental health, especially for people that have lived through trauma, such as war, or had a traumatic brain injury, like even knowing they have a traumatic brain injury, which we talked about before, and identifying it and providing answers so they don't think they're just completely crazy, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think if anybody knew the answer to your question, we'd be instituting solutions rather than just talking about problems.
Well, that's what, like I love what you do. I love that we're talking about it, at least trying to like get the conversation started to make further advancements, because I think a lot of it is removing the stigma.
Yeah, and I think in many ways veterans need each other. Part of the issue is veterans are military. You come together from all parts of the country. You get guys from the deep south who have never seen snow in their life, guys from the Northeast, the Midwest, California. They all come together. And all of a sudden, where you came from stops mattering. All that matters is what's at hand. And you sort of...
a common goal.
Yeah, you forge this bond of like who this sort of like unique bond that like you've never shared with anyone else in the world. I'll pause for a second. Jay's got a question. Have either of the two of you been deployed somewhere? Yes, I was deployed as a United States Marine in Afghanistan in 2010. Josh has been deployed to video game land.
100%. Azeroth.
Yes,
specifically.
Josh
and Runeterra.
Yeah. So anyway, it's this unique bond that you form, and that bond really carries you through some pretty intense experiences in your life. And then you come back from those experiences, and many of you scatter back to where you came from. All right. You sort of go back to the winds, different parts of the country. I'm in New Jersey. My one friend, a very close friend I was deployed with, is in Tennessee. It's 14 hours away by car. Another close friend is in Arkansas. It's like 16 hours away by car. Another close friend's in Texas. It's like probably 25 hours away by. Like, these are not insignificant differences. I mean, I'm just curious, Jade, you're in the chat. If you drove 25 hours by car in Europe, how far could you make it? Like, presumably you would be outside of Sweden. Is that correct? Let me know in the chat. I'm kind of curious because I think we forget like what that really means. And so you form this bond.
In a bond to get through a traumatic event, right?
Exactly.
Like the bond is to get through it together.
Exactly.
And then that's
you are the support network to each other. And then what happens? You finish that experience, you get on a plane, you fly back to the United States, and all of a sudden you're just scattered to the winds.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why, or maybe hypotheses that people have proposed as to why veteran suicide rate is so different in the post 9/11 population versus pre 9/11 population is because, in the world wars, veterans had to get on a ship to go home. And that ship would take 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to sail across the world to get you back to where you're going. And that was a time that was considered like sacred bonding decompression time for veterans with the people that they shared the experiences with. And we've essentially obliterated that in the day of air travel to the point where you can get on a plane, you fly home, you get home, you're so excited, you want to reconnect with your family, and you sort of like instantly sever these sacred bonds. And the thought is that process, not having that extended weeks of decompression time with these people you've shared this experience with, is leading to poor coping mechanisms. And you've got, increased alcoholism and all sorts of issues that then lead to, poor psychiatric outcomes. Now, granted, it's not to say that these things didn't exist, right? Anybody's watched Forrest Gump and see that, Lieutenant Dan had plenty of alcohol issues, and that is, a very realistic situation. So what do we got? Jade says limits 110 kilometers per hour. Sounds so fast.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Per hour. Carlos says Sweden's 977 miles long.
Is it long, like north and south?
So far, no one is answering my question. I don't think. So 110 kilometers times 25.
That's longer.
Okay, so maybe between these two answers we're getting at. So 110 times 25 is
I was not told that I have to do math tonight. This is
1,550 roughly. Let's do some math. 110 times 25, 2,750, right? And Carlos is saying Sweden is 977 miles long.
Carlos, which way though? Up and down, left
so
and right?
That's almost 3 times, right? So if you drove for 25 hours, presumably, you could drive the full length of Sweden 3 times. So definitively, you're going to end up in another country in Europe. You're not still going to be in Sweden. So now, as somebody who's in Europe, think about being on a deployment, sharing this traumatic life experience that has bonded you to someone, these other people that have saved your life. They have stood by you. They have stood back to back, shoulder to shoulder. Jeez Louise, I can't talk.
Soldier to soldier, shoulder to soldier.
Yeah.
Say that to us fast.
You have fought, you have been to hell and back together. And then that person leaves to go 3-4 countries away. Right?
Well, I think,
that's what's happening in the United States to veterans. That's not necessarily happening to veterans in European countries.
And what's the average age of like people enlisted in the military? It's pretty young, I would assume. Like, I'm sure there's like lifers.
Point. Obviously, in the United States, fairly young, right? I felt like when I was
formative years, right?
Yeah, I feel like when I was overseas in transit through Kyrgyzstan, there was a unit of people from Georgia. And I remember looking at
the state or the country?
The country, not the state.
All right.
States don't have their own military. I remember there was this unit of individuals from Georgia, the country. And I remember looking at these people and being like, God darn, these people are old, man. Like, they not have young people to serve in their military? Now, granted, they may cultural differences, maybe. I don't know. Maybe Georgians just look like fat 40-year-old men at 20 years old. I don't know. But I remember literally, I mean, that may be a cultural thing, right? Military service may be an older, I don't know. To me, I remember thinking.
There's countries that have like mandatory years served in the military as well, right? So it's not even people that necessarily signed up, and it's like, but usually there's a lot of cultural differences. Usually I think you have to by like a certain age, you have to like serve a year or two, something like that. Like, I don't know.
I'm very curious, like what these people would say about us, right? Because I feel like they were like these like old 40-year-old men that were probably looking at these 18-year-olds like, look at these children going to war.
Yeah. Wasting your lives young.
Yeah, these young children, babies with their shaved faces going to war. Or like my buddy Olson, who literally couldn't grow facial hair even if he tried. If you're out there, Olson, I love you. Say hello.
Beard or not.
Yeah.
So appreciate the support.
Yeah. So I think that aspect
it plays a part for sure. I feel like all of these things play a part in this, and can only be worsened by traumatic brain injuries, right? Or amplified. Like you're already taking this potentially traumatic experience and then possibly throwing TBIs in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, TBI definitely compounds the issue, right? That's one thing. Like this article we were kind of reviewing as a stimulus for tonight's conversation, definitely gets at, right? Like TBI exacerbates these issues. The question then is not, I mean, without getting into the weeds of like, why is all this stuff happening? I think you're asking the right question of like, what do we do about it? Because that's more important, right? Like, how do we move forward? We can't go back and like change the war.
Yeah. And things we talked about before, like, even if these issues exist in somebody's head before they have a traumatic brain injury, is a traumatic brain injury making it worse? What happens when you have multiple of them? And to have a third of the military, essentially a third of them affected by this.
What did there was a statistic in this paper that was quoting how many military members had some form of TBI prior to service. So that way, you know, if you assume a third of military members are experiencing a traumatic brain injury in service, there's a significant number of those where it is not their first TBI. And obviously we know from general medical literature that repeat traumatic brain injuries create a compounding effect.
And then to add on that, so if they have one before they enlisted in the military, let's assume they had that injury before the age of 18, that could have already been affecting something as well. To have another one after that compounded on top of it, like you have all these factors, right? Just kind of ramping this issue up and highlighting how truly devastating this can be to a large group of people.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think that's the bigger thing, and what can be done about it, what should be done about it.
I mean, my personal perspective, and obviously it is not founded in data or anything, it's just my personal perspective on things, is that I don't think that military and veterans can, well, they could rely on healthcare professionals. I don't think it's a downfall of the healthcare community so much. Is military and veterans, they're a very guarded population, right? We've walked through experiences and trials in life that other people haven't. And for that reason, we're very hesitant to let people from outside those experiences dictate to us what it is that we feel and need.
Well, and
so we
adding another wrinkle that, like, I think suicide rates are higher in men as well, and I would assume most of the serving community, I feel like it would sway in favor of more male dominated.
I mean, if you look at ratios or like percentages, I forget if the article commented on it. That may not be the case.
Okay.
But
that's me making an assumption.
Traumatic brain injury is overall higher among male service members because of the difference in duty responsibilities of male service members versus female service members. I think that's pretty obvious. You don't have as many active frontline combatant roles filled by females.
Mm-hmm.
However, that being said, and this is something that's, you know, obviously not what we haven't talked about this previously, but is a significant issue is the reason why I would be hesitant to say that males definitely have a higher suicide rate than female service members is because something that female service members deal with that male service members do not deal with as much or nearly as much is military connected sexual trauma.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to service members in general. I thought suicide rates just male to female across the country were higher. I believe, but that you bring up an interesting point for
across the country. Yes, completed suicide is higher amongst males.
Okay,
females, I believe, have a higher attempted rate of suicide, but their success rate of actually completing suicide, I believe, is generally lower than males. My recollection of those statistics is correct. I have not recently looked any of that stuff up, but
me either. But I thought that was just.
I'm pretty sure that's the case, and I think in general it's probably because of selection of suicide methods. In general, hang on one second. Speak of the devil. One of my close buddies I deployed with is texting me right now. Let me tell him. Go ahead and ramble on for a second. I'm going to text him back because it seems
good. I'm good at rambling, but these are all all very, let's see, Carlos got back to us in the chat. Adult females reported a suicide attempt 1.5 times as often as males. Okay, so that's purely attempted. So I was mistaken on suicide attempts, at least.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. So I think because of, sorry, I was just, my buddy
No, okay.
Chris, who I deployed with, was literally just texting me. He loves watching the show, so he was texting me right in the middle of it. So I think that's related more to methodology.
Okay.
Males will, I think it's the type of thing where
And
females are generally more cautious in how they approach suicide. And so when they decide how they're going to kill themselves, they generally want to do it in a less traumatic, less painful way. Males tend to be select like, I want fast and immediate what's the word I'm looking? Fast and immediate execution to achieve my goal. And so I think in general, males will use firearms to kill themselves. Females probably attempt things like pill overdoses more frequently because I suspect their mindset is it's less painful. They'll just take some pills, they'll go to sleep. And that's why I think clinically, as a physician, now speaking kind of more as like a general physician experience, not as much as a veteran, you will typically see females come into the emergency room with attempted overdoses. And at least I can't think of, I mean, outside of gang violence, where it was not attempted suicide, it was more attempted homicide. I have not seen attempted suicide males shoot themselves in the head. I've seen a handful of homicides where they've been shot in the head. But that's sort of my suspicion in terms of like why things are the way that why those statistics are the way that they are.
Yeah, and another statistic is males die by suicide 3 to 4 times more often than females do. So confirming what you talked about
males complete suicide more often than females. I was pretty confident in that statistic. The fact that it's 3 to 4 times more often, I did not realize it was quite that high.
Yeah,
but that doesn't surprise me.
And to me, my personal thought on that is I do think that there is a stigma around people talking about mental health in general, especially from like the male perspective, right? It's like, it's not cool to talk about your feelings. Like, at least that previously was.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigma.
That's how we grew up, right? And that's why I think talking about it is an important thing. So,
well, I mean, you're exactly right? Psychology has very lethal effects. And I think when the psychology of a human being is unaddressed, which tends to happen with a lot of male veterans or even female veterans, it's just the reasoning, the root cause, I think, is different. Female veterans they have a high burden of sexual abuse trauma that happens in the service, which is horrible and sad and not talked about it nearly enough as it is. And I tend to think that leads to female service connected suicide, whereas the male cohort is probably more PTSD from combat. I mean, it's all PTSD, right? It's some form of PTSD. It's just, is it PTSD stemming from sexual trauma, or is it PTSD stemming from combat trauma?
Right.
And so if I had to venture kind of an estimate, the actual overall suicide rates are probably not as different as you might think, but the reasoning for it might be different.
Yeah, which that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, that's what we were talking about before. There's different types of traumas, and both of them, both male, female, any service member is more prone to having a TBI, just sheer proximity to blast.
Yeah, TBI is going to compound the issue completely. And because of the guarded nature that I think a lot of veterans have, lack of trust in, healthcare providers who are not veterans. I mean, heck, this is obviously speaking from a little bit of a pompous perspective. I acknowledge that. And so take what I say with a grain of salt. I think even enlisted veterans who bear a significant proportion of that combat trauma, they even look at like military doctors. They're service members. They've been through their own version of boot camp, but it's different. right? They came in as officers. They didn't go through the grind that we did as enlisted men.
Yeah.
And we look at them and we don't, I mean, yeah, we trust them a lot more than we trust a civilian. But you're never going to trust that officer,
because they don't know what you experience. So how can
exactly,
someone know what you're
exactly.
feeling if
I
they
mean,
haven't been through it too? Like that
there's-
exists outside of.
yeah, there's a divide between enlisted and officers just in operations. Now,
Right.
physicians in the military who are officers, there's an even bigger divide between them and the boots on the ground enlisted men. And there's definitely a lack of professional trust. Then you take that one step further to civilian physicians, and now that gap becomes a chasm of untrust.
Right.
And the thing is, yes, I do believe that healthcare professionals are best equipped to help veterans. I do. I really do believe that. But when the veterans don't trust you or are willing to allow you to help them, I mean, heck, I've been to a psychiatrist. Ask the psychiatrist I used to see. His name's Dr. Sachs. I think he's retired. The guy will probably tell you I was the most guarded person he's probably ever taken care of in his career. And we would literally sit there and yell at each other when we would talk to each other. But then he would laugh because he's literally just so mind blown at how ridiculous this veteran is in his office. And that's just how we are. Like, I don't know how to, I don't know why. I mean, well, maybe I do know why. But the point is, it's a very tough population to gain the trust of and to truly impact. And that's why I think a lot of veterans are turning to each other and saying, like, we're done making this a problem with the VA healthcare system. We're done making this a problem of modern healthcare. This is a problem that we need to address, and we need to be there for each other. And things like Vet TV are popping up, and, you know, veteran-owned nonprofit organizations. And, you know, heck, why we do what I do, right, with Brain and Spine Group is because veterans are turning to each other to be like, hey, we can't trust the doctors to keep our brothers alive. We need to keep our own brothers alive. And that's exactly how we were bred and created in the fires of training for the things that we trained for, was to keep each other alive. And doing that post active service, this is what it looks like, right? It looks like veterans running nonprofit organizations, starting programs to get out there and convince their brothers, hey, I know you're going through some crap. Let's go get a beer. Sit down with me. Talk to me. Be with me.
Right.
I'm not going to stop caring about you.
Like, how are you supposed to even get somebody to talk about it if they're not comfortable opening up to somebody, right? Like, and taking down that wall and making it easier to talk about, or possibly at least, you know, potentially easier to speak about when they're in a comfortable situation, speaking to somebody they feel comfortable talking to. Like, that's where it starts. And I think it's a good place.
Jade asks, when you were in Afghanistan, did you have any instances where you had very high probability that you could die? The answer is definitively yes.
Well, let's, and this is something I always, I don't know why I get anxious, like, asking somebody who served and been deployed, you know, about their experience. Cause I don't want to come off to that person like I wasn't there, you know, what's acceptable, what's not. But what are some of the injuries that you witnessed that could be TBI related, whatever you feel comfortable talking about, of course, you know, like what are some examples? Like, I mean, we talked about blasts, right?
Yeah.
Like, that makes sense. But the parachuters, that's another one that I didn't necessarily think about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know anybody with like a parachute related, I don't know anybody with parachute related injury. But, oh yeah, my buddy Olson, here we go. He's in the chat. He goes, ha, every time you leave the wire. That is right, my friend. It is right. Hopefully that answers your question, Jade. Obviously, Jade's on Twitch. Olson's watching on YouTube. We thank you both for being with us tonight, but hopefully we can connect you to answer each other's questions. But, what was your question? Sorry, sort of evaded me. I was
just
reading the chat.
Some of the injuries that we haven't talked about that could lead to,
like, how do actually these things happen?
Yeah.
I think my suspicion is that jumping injuries are probably a big contributor to the spinal cord injuries you see in the military. Obviously, like, a blast can cause all kinds of injuries, right? I mean, they could cause amputations if they blow, you know, a limb off, or severely damage a limb, even if it doesn't actually blow the limb off. A blast can cause shrapnel to end up somewhere it shouldn't end up in your spine and cause a paralysis or spinal cord injury. Obviously, it can cause penetrating brain injury. It can cause non-penetrating brain injury. Penetrating meaning like literally like the difference between like a bullet or like shrapnel penetrating the skull and embedding itself in the brain, being a penetrating injury versus just like a blast injury where a pressure wave causes
concussion.
Yeah, really bad
severe
concussion. Severe, moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, even if you don't have penetrating injuries. And this is getting into like how do we classify all the injuries of war, which that was kind of something I wanted to get into tonight, but we just sort of been having an interesting conversation and haven't gotten down that path.
Well, that's what I wanted to at least like touch on, especially with that question, just like opening up to what veterans see during combat that people may not even think about. Right. Like in something like Afghanistan was it's pretty close quarters at times. Like even, what's the effect of hearing gunfire in a confined area with no ear protection, right? Like that's got to have something too.
I mean, heck, ask a guy like my brother who's like practically deaf.
I mean, I fired a gun, my earplug, even in the shooting range, my earplug wasn't in all the way and my ear was ringing for like 2 days. Like it's not great.
You ask a guy like my brother, who is I will happily go on record to say is a complete knucklehead, even though I love him. My suspicion is never wore earplugs because why would you when you're 18 years old and you don't care about anything? And the guy can't even hear. He's 33, 34.
That's my age.
33. And the guy literally can't hear. He has hearing aids at 33. And that's not from an acute injury. That's literally from his entire service career of just not wearing any ear protection. And the thing is, I can't really blame him. I mean, personally, I did wear ear protection when I was doing range exercises, but for me, it was always because I wanted to be very focused, and the ear protection allowed me to focus because obviously a firing range is a very noisy place. But I never wore ear protection on like an actual mission or patrol or anything like that. Absolutely not. I only wore it on the ranges while training, and it was like purely because it's just a loud place and I was trying to focus. And when you're being scored and graded and you want to do well on these things, these exercises, you want to do the best you can. And that, to me, that was a way that allowed me to do that. It wasn't because at 18 years old I was like thinking like, oh my gosh, I want to preserve my hearing when I'm in my 30s. I could have cared less. Whereas my brother, he's just a sand pounder and would, just do whatever he needed to do. And now he's like practically deaf at 33 years old. Let's see. What's Jay got to say? Got great conversation tonight. The only reason I'd go into such areas would be to look for rare weapons like 1949. Yeah. I mean, this is like before my time, early in the, conflicts, like early 2000s. I was there in 2010. I went to boot camp in 2008. So my time frame kind of spanned from 2008 to 2012, which I would say, I mean, considering when we left Afghanistan to where we entered Afghanistan was like pretty much like smack in the middle. But the people that were like really early, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, probably like these people were like literally engaged in the Middle East before like really rigid regulations of like the Geneva Convention and everything were being enforced. And these people were like taking war trophies and like crazy AKs and all kinds of stuff like that they would find, from, all kinds of who knows what experiences. It was, I mean, don't get me wrong. Afghanistan was the wild, wild west compared to anything here in the United States. But if you compare like Afghanistan and Iraq in 2001 compared to Iraq and Afghanistan in 2010, I mean, that is just a different level of the wild, wild west that people had over there at that time. I mean, that was an experience I never had.
I think we got another comment from Olson as well. I don't know if we threw that one up on there, but he said
it's hard to move, communicate, and shoot.
I think he meant if you can't hear.
If you can't hear.
Why would you wear those?
Exactly. Yeah. when you're in a truly tactical environment, you want to be able to hear what's going on around.
Right.
At the expense of your hearing when you're 30 years old. So, where did we leave off? I feel like I was in the middle of making a point. Standing on my soapbox, getting ready to make a point about something.
Types of injuries.
Oh, we wanted to talk about all the different types of like brain and spine injuries across we've been talking just about like modern Iraq-Afghanistan conflicts. When we put the idea of this show together, like talking about all the different injuries of war, in my mind, I envisioned like all the different like eras of like war combat, right? Like think about like when you really sit, if we watch all these movies, like, I don't know, what are some of the good ones?
Band of Brothers. That's a show.
Even still, that's going back to like the World Wars. Go back further than that. Gladiator with was it Russell Crowe, right?
Yeah.
Gladiator was Russell Crowe. What else is there? I mean, all these
300. Like, I don't think that's accurate.
300, right? You think about like the types of injuries these people were sustaining compared to like today. You know, these guys, you've got blunt injury to the head. Like imagine getting smashed in the head with like a legit old school war mallet. Or like stabbed in the head with
some of those like ancient artifact weapons that you'll stumble across on the internet. It's wild because it's just a blunt object.
Or what are those like big giant like battle axes with like a spear at the tip? What are those things called? I forget.
Oh man, I'm blanking on what it is. You're talking about like it's not like
battle axe with spear. I mean, this is why we have Google, right?
Yeah, there's a name for it.
The halberd. A halberd. You know what I'm talking about?
I could look it up too. How do you spell that?
A halberd. Halberd. Do I need? Maybe I'll just pull up some pictures over here on the side screen for everyone. We'll just go. Let's just adjust some settings real quick. That way we can see everything. Like, I mean, this is kind of a lame version, but.
Oh yeah, this is exactly what I was thinking of. I just didn't even realize that's what it was called. Yeah, those are wild looking.
Halberd. Like literally, like imagine getting stabbed in the dome with something like this. Let's just say like war skull injuries. I mean, if you look at like the
you see like the ones of like with like people like stuck in. I saw one of these
skulls that people have like excavated from these like old school
with like a spear like half in or like a hammer like literally stuck through their face.
Yeah.
A sword.
I mean, this is like crazy. But to me, it's like it's fascinating. These are like the original old school penetrating brain traumas of like
imagine being a brain surgeon. Imagine being a brain surgeon back in the day.
Imagine being a brain surgeon in like ancient Rome, right? I would just post up outside the Colosseum and just be patching people up as like they got mauled by lions and stuff, you know?
That's
like, what a time to be alive. Like, I mean, we got all these brain surgeons today that want to butcher homeless people to do unindicated surgeries. I mean, heck, if they just existed back in like ancient Rome, they'd be having the time of their lives as brain surgeons.
Plenty, man. I guess is that the era you would choose if you could take your knowledge and your expertise and the technology from now? When would you place yourself to be a brain surgeon?
You're saying if I could use everything we know about brain surgery today,
you pick up your hospital that you're in and you place it in an era of time, what would you choose?
I mean, it'd have to be like, it would have to be ancient Rome with the Colosseums, right? I mean, these guys had to be getting bludgeoned.
Here we go. We got a comment in the chat from Bishop. IR is here. Glad you're here, Bishop. What era of war would you like to insert yourself into to witness traumatic brain injuries? What era of traumatic brain injuries as a brain surgeon do you want to insert yourself? Ryan wants to be at the Gladiator medieval times region.
I mean, I would have literally just posted up outside the Colosseum with like my mobile OR, patching up people as they came out with like getting mauled by lions. or the Civil War. I feel like the Civil War would have been a great era.
Think about that always seems like a wild time to me, just from the guns, like pre-rifling, right? It was just a ball firing through a tube and you didn't know who was going to hit. It probably wasn't going to kill somebody right
Could
away.
you imagine just standing on like a Civil War firing line and they're literally just blasting musket balls at each other and you're just praying one of them doesn't hit you in the dome?
You're hoping it doesn't backfire on you. You're hoping it goes straight. I mean,
you don't even know where the thing goes.
There's a reason they had the bayonets on the end, and there's probably like a bayonet stuck.
Could you imagine taking a bayonet to the face in the Civil War? Oh my gosh,
that's gonna be a pass for me, dog. If I could,
I mean, that's the time. I mean, you want to be a trauma neurosurgeon? I mean, those are the times, my friend. The thing is, back then, like that stuff didn't even exist.
Right. That's why I'd say, like, if you could take your technology and everything you know now and just insert yourself, where would you?
Oh, exactly. I mean, let's see. Just for reference, the Civil War was 1860s. Modern neurosurgery was supposedly, claimed to be founded by Harvey Cushing, who practiced medicine in the 1920s, early 1900s. I think the guy, when did Harvey Cushing die? Let me see. Harvey Cushing.
Talk to the wrong guy.
Died in 1939. So this guy practiced neurosurgery, basically founded neurosurgery in like the late 19 teens, probably to like early 1930s, before like dying in the late 30s, just as a rough estimate. And this guy, according to the historical literature,
the lore,
he was like the first really documented person to specialize as a neurosurgeon, and then the whole field of neurosurgery sort of birthed out of his original works in the early 1900s. So with the Civil War being in the 1860s, this is like 50 to 60 years before Harvey Cushing even came into the scene. Neurosurgery didn't even exist back then. It was literally like barber surgeons. Like, you go get your hair cut at the barber, the guy would also like chop off a chunk of your skull and remove a piece of tumor for you.
My barber does that on the side.
Yeah, I would trust my barber to do brain surgery on me. Sure, why not? I mean, there's basically a skill.
Steady hands,
some
man.
people out there, I'm sure, just butchering people.
Yeah.
If you could take what we know now and the ability to do basic trauma neurosurgery now, but insert yourself in the Civil War, I don't know. That might be pretty.
Just that, nothing else.
That might be a pretty great, surgical experience for an individual. Now, granted,
probably be busy.
Part of the issue back then too is there's no antisepsis, right? There's no way to fight the bacteria. So you have to kind of like take antibiotics with you, because you like do all these great surgeries.
You can take only your doctor stuff with you. Only doctor stuff. Nothing else. Yeah.
You're going to go back, the Civil War? You're going to do brain surgery, save the lives of a bunch of people who are otherwise just going to be dead. And then like 6 weeks later, they die from like a raging staph infection when you could have just given them some like penicillin or vancomycin. It's like, so you need some technology from today to make it work. Let's see. We got some more questions that are trickling in. Bishop says, what, in your expert opinion, would be the best course of treatment for a wound delivered by a lead aspirin delivery system at a rate of 2200 to 2200 FPS? I'm a little confused by this.
I think that's a bullet. I think he means a bullet fired out of a gun.
FPS? Like frames per second?
I don't think it's frames.
Feet per second.
That sounds more right. I'm no expert.
Wait a second. Feet per second. I don't even know the average rate. What is the typical expert with the best course of treatment for a wound delivered by lead aspirin? Okay. Delivery. Yeah, I get that. I'm a little confused by your question. Are you asking what would happen if somebody got shot in the head with a bullet? Is that the simple question? What is the average?
How do you treat that? Like, because realistically,
bullet speed. I don't even know like average. Let's see. An average M16 muzzle velocity is 3,000 feet per second. So drastically higher than what Bishop is suggesting. I don't think your feet per second. Well, see, as I'm diving into like your question, there's so many things swirling around in my head about factors to consider here. So it's not just, there's so many things to consider. Okay, so he's equating to a 9mm. I'm looking up an M16 because if you ask me, a 9mm is not a weapon built to kill. I'm interested in weapons that are built to kill. A 9mm, it can kill. It's not built to kill. A weapon that's built to kill is like an M16, in my opinion. Obviously, it's a biased opinion, but there's a lot of things to consider. And it's not just how fast does the bullet come out and what is it made of. There's what does that bullet do when it makes impact. If you have a bullet hit somebody in the head and it's a through and through injury, luck is about all you've got on your side at that point. Where did it track and what happened? I will say, in general, a penetrating bullet injury to the head rarely has a good outcome. That being said, I've seen people where like they get like a bullet. Technically, they were shot in the head, but like the bullet kind of to the angle they were shot at, the bullet sort of like hits their skull, causes like a giant skull fracture, but the bullet itself kind of ricochets off the skull and it doesn't actually really penetrate the brain. And so you get a lot of like focal damage to where the bullet impacted the skull, but the bullet didn't travel through the brain itself, in which case they're going to have, like, in which case those patients, if they don't have like a massive complication, like their brain swells and causes a lot of problems, you know, you can generally, depending on the severity, maybe you can decompress the patient and give them time to recover, like a TBI patient, and maybe they'll have some deficits. Maybe they don't. Like, you could see a patient like that fully recover. In fact, I've even had patients where they come in and you're like, hey, have you ever had like a brain trauma before? They're like, yeah, I got shot in the head once. And you're like, what? And sure enough, they got shot in the head and like the bullet kind of like ricocheted and didn't leave any lasting impacts, and they recovered from it. And their story is not a lie, even though they don't look like someone who got shot in the head. I've also had people who got shot in the head and they're like dead in less than 24 hours because their brain just swells, or, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just a bad brain injury. Does that answer your question, Bishop? Hopefully it does. I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer definitively. Anyway, let's see. What else do we got here? Was Jade's had his comment. No, wait, if the Twitch hot tubbers clashed with the TikTok conspiracy theorists, that could be the bloodiest and most brain damaged inducing battle in history.
That's World War III right there.
Jade, what you're missing, there's one key fact that you're missing here. These people are already brain damaged before the clash has even occurred, because they're already brain dead.
This is the future of war right here.
We do not do surgery on people who are already brain dead. So, in fact, there would be nothing to do. All right. So we've talked about these a little bit about battle axes and
favorite medieval weapon, go.
What's that?
Favorite medieval weapon, go.
Ooh. I mean, how do you? I would just use like a giant. I mean, a giant broadsword, old school, nothing fancy, just a giant, massive broadsword.
All right.
I mean, assuming that's. I mean, what are my other options?
I'm thinking like like a flail though. No, I want like a flail. I think that's what they're called. It's like the
like a
mace ball
spiked mace with a chain. You know,
swing.
I feel like you
AOE
knowing
damage.
you, I feel like you'd accidentally like spike yourself in the ass with it.
100%. That is accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man. Let's see. So we've kind of covered like medieval stuff, that time frame. What about crazy? Could you imagine? Like, I always imagine like the thought of being on the receiving end of a trebuchet.
I don't know what you just said, but I think I'm offended by it.
Trebuchet. Like, have you ever played Age of Empires?
It's been a while.
A trebuchet. Here we go.
It's times like this where I'm glad I was born in the era I was born in, right? Because I
Mm.
don't think I would handle hand-to-hand combat very well.
Well, here you go. What are these things? Can you imagine a giant trebuchet, like a giant boulder,
to the chest,
literally just blasting you right in the dome. I mean, that's an injury of war, my friend. That's an injury of war.
I love that this is what you wanted to talk about, was like injuries of all wars, and we ended up going on this
injuries of all wars. When I was
we're gonna
a kid,
have to have a part two. We're gonna have to have a part two.
I used to love playing Age of Empires, right?
Yeah.
Me and my good childhood friend Mike, we would sit around and we'd sort of, have these ridiculous conversations about like,
Hodges?
No, not Hodges. Different Mike.
Right.
I guess I know way too many Mikes.
Yeah, too many Mikes.
Way too many Mikes. We would have these like ridiculous conversations of like, imagine these, medieval war plans. And I told him, I was like, I think when I grow up, I want to buy the local mall, because we have this big mall in our town, the Bridgewater Commons Mall. I told him, you know what? One day I'm going to buy the mall. I'm going to buy the whole mall. I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to turn it into a giant castle, and I'm going to build trebuchets that will launch flaming boulders of lava upon the surrounding town.
All of this checks out.
This was my plan when I was in like 6th or 7th grade, like how I was going to conquer the world, right? And it was all going to start by buying the Bridgewater Commons Mall and surrounding it with trebuchets. My dad caught wind of this plan and thought it was so ridiculous that even now, at 30 plus years old, he does not let me forget that is still my life's mission, is to buy the Bridgewater Commons Mall and turn it into a castle and lay siege upon the surrounding town.
So hear me out. I've got an idea. We build a trebuchet that we can launch, like a functioning one, that we can launch something safe to hurl at people that will knock them over and create comedy, but not completely wound them. And we go LARPing with it. And we take over the LARP world. What we
could do is we could do a stream challenge, because we are in the middle of a fundraiser. If you scan the QR code or text BSG to 44321, you can join our fundraiser. Now, this fundraiser is solely to help us launch community service programs aimed at supporting veterans, military, and other patients with brain and spine injuries, so that we can help them move forward in their life with their brain or their spine injury. Now, obviously, we have a very benevolent mission. We want to take care of individuals with brain and spine injury with a special attention to veterans. So join our fundraiser if you want to do that. We would greatly appreciate it. However, if we reach our goal of raising $15,000 by February 15th, what we can do is Josh and I will build a trebuchet, and we will do a live stream where we launch content.
I'll try and catch a watermelon.
Because I do have a giant field across the street from my house, which, fun fact, as a child, my brother and I built a snowman in this field, and then asked ourselves, this is, again, going back to like 7th or 8th grade. So imagine like a 7th and 8th grader posing the question to each other, can you light snow on fire? And so after building a snowman, we decided to douse it in gasoline and light it on fire. We had a grand time. Our younger sisters saw us doing this, And it was one of those moments where you don't really think the whole thing through. You know, you're like 7th, 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
We realized, we're like, wait a second, there's no way our younger sisters do not rat us out to our parents. And so we literally went over and we said to our sisters, whatever you do not tell mom and dad. One sister kept her mouth shut, didn't say anything. About a week later, my other sister, I remember this day, clear as day. We're sitting in the kitchen. She's at the table. My mom's sitting there. Meaning, no one any the wiser that my brother and I lit a snowman on fire a week before. And no one is asking questions. Everyone's sitting there quietly, minding their own business. She bursts into tears. And my mother says, "What? What's wrong?" And she goes, "There's something I'm not allowed to tell you." She was like 6 years old. Can't blame her. And I remember looking at her and being like, "I will kill you if you tell mom." She tells my mom, obviously, and my mom just thought the whole thing was so hilarious that we didn't get in trouble. So bullet dodged. But I will never forget that story in my life. But anyway, there is a giant field where we once lit a snowman on fire, where we can build a trebuchet and we can launch it if we reach our goal of $15,000 by February 15th. So go ahead, scan the QR code, text BSG to 44321, or you can go to our website. Carlos will post the link in the chat for you. You can join our fundraiser, help us reach that goal. And if you do, we will build a trebuchet and launch it at someone to see if we can indeed give them a traumatic brain injury. Let's see, what else do we got? Jade says, most common spine injuries occur when you sit in a vehicle and it hits an IED. Yes, no, maybe. I don't think that's true, but I don't have data to back this statement up. My suspicion is that spine injuries come primarily from things like parachuting accidents. Actually, there is a veteran, let me look this up, veteran neurosurgery collaborative or something like that, I think it's called. Special Forces Neurosurgery Collaborative. Oh, this is their Twitter page. Let me find their website. I think this is it. Yeah, this is it. Let me pull this up for everyone. So I don't know much about this organization. So I don't really have much to say about who they are or are not. I cannot attest to them one way or the other. But I do know about who, in general, like some of the work that they've done. And they collected some data, which I thought was kind of interesting, which was this here. So they basically collected data on TBI and spinal cord injury. And I think some of their findings were kind of interesting. 19% of Green Berets report spinal cord injury. 87% of Green Berets report wearing headgear at the time of injury. Not entirely sure how that's applicable to spinal cord injury. 37% of Green Berets report wearing body armor at the time of injury. I guess they're kind of combining their spinal cord injury data with their TBI data. That's why.
So I guess like spinal cord injury doesn't just have to be like a fall or something. I mean, you get a bullet lodged in there too, right?
Yes.
So that's where like the body armor, or maybe like I don't know where the helmet's
on
like a military helmet.
I mean, in general, when you think about like body armor, I mean, the things that it's going to do the best job protecting are the things in the center of your body. And that's how it's sort of designed, right? Your SAPI plates do,
the good organs, the ones that keep blood pumping.
Yeah. So while not impossible, I still think and again, I could be wrong about this because I don't have data to back this up. I'm just sort of proposing my opinions. I think bullets, shrapnel, sure, 100%. They can cause spinal cord injury, no doubt about it. If I had to guess, the things that are the most likely offenders are probably like axial loading from bad jumps when parachuting, possibly blast injury as like secondary Basically, like not the blast injury itself, but the blast injury literally
being
knocks
thrown?
someone back,
Yeah.
throws them into
Something.
some part of the terrain, and that
Yeah.
physical impact could lead to spinal cord injury. I think those things are more probable than like a bullet getting lodged in someone's spine.
Okay.
Possibly. I don't know. That's my hunch and my suspicion.
Okay.
Let's see. Bishop still trying to bring my ruling of the local area kingdom into existence. If you buy the strip, it's not a strip mall. This is a fully functional, multi-level, premier shopping experience. It's not a strip mall. We can call it a sovereign nation, and encroachment will be met with flaming trebuchets. Well, somebody in this world understands my vision. So,
What would you name this sovereign nation?
ooh.
And can we build a moat around it?
The moat will have to be filled with lava, my friend.
I'm cool with that.
Yes. Or we can fill it with nacho cheese.
I always love just the idea of a drawbridge. Just
We
awesome
could fill
to
it
me.
with nacho cheese
I'm cool with that too.
and Taco Bell.
I'm glad that our minds have not evolved from the time when we were. How old were you when you came up with this?
7th grade, roughly.
Brilliant.
It's a solid life plan. I mean, I haven't given it up.
Yeah,
I mean, they say never give up on your dreams.
I believe in it.
Let's see. What would I name my sovereign nation?
It's very key.
I feel like I would have to name it in a way that it baits someone into becoming my arch nemesis. Because if you don't have an arch nemesis, I mean, who are you as a sovereign nation?
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
That's
So
true.
then the question becomes, who can I bait into buying a surrounding area and waging war against me?
Mhm.
Carlos says, ask ChatGPT for names. That's a fantastic idea. Let's see. ChatGPT, the wildest thing to exist in modern age, I think, which is grossly utilized. Log in by probably a significant number of people. Sounds good. Let's do a new chat. Turn the screen on. Say, hi. I'm planning on buying the local mall and turning it into a medieval sovereign nation, defended by trebuchets. I spelled trebuchet correctly?
TREBUCHETS.
Trebuchet, defended by trebuchets and flaming projectiles.
Mhm.
What should I name my kingdom?
Mm-hmm. This is how technology should be used.
Yeah, this is how such technology should be used.
Mhm.
Let me see. Jade says there's Swaziland. So your country could be named Sovereignland. Okay, something to consider. Let's see here. What does ChatGPT say? You could name your kingdom Ignitia, which means fiery in Latin, reflecting the use of flaming projectiles. Another option could be Tribune, which means siege tower in Latin, to reflect the use of trebuchets in your kingdom's defense. So, I think the name of our kingdom would be Fiery Tribune of Rad. There we go. The Fiery Tribune of Rad. Bow, peasant.
Ignitia Tribune.
So there we go. We got to the bottom of a bishop. The Fiery Tribune of Rad. These are the things. These are the real questions I had in mind when I said, you know what? I want to be a doctor. I'm going to go to medical school. The United
Getting to the important
Fiery Tribune of Rad. Oh yes, the storefronts are exactly that, a front of war.
And hey, like once that's in place, and you're warring with another nation, when the zombie apocalypse hits, we're set.
What's better
Boom.
to defend against zombies than fire? The
Lava and
fiery
fire.
tribune of
Mhm.
Rad. All right. On that note, I think we've sufficiently derailed, although
Oh
I've
yeah.
enjoyed thoroughly discussing
Oh
the
yeah.
neurologic traumatic injuries of war. So, on that note, we'll go ahead and mention one more time, bringing it back to a little bit more serious topic. Obviously, we love getting silly and ridiculous on this show. It's what we do. We want to show you that even myself as a physician, obviously not a doctor, Norty, we are all about bridging the gaps, right? We do not want to put myself as a healthcare provider on any sort of pedestal that patients can't relate to. And Josh's job as my friend and co-host is to help talk about these serious issues in a way where we can paint it relatably and fun for patients to dig in and understand what it is that is really going on when you have brain or spine injuries or illness. Obviously, we focus a lot on trauma and military with my background, but that's not all we care about, right? We care about anyone that has a brain or a spine injury. And so, as we wrap up, we just ask that you would take a few minutes, consider joining our fundraiser to help us do what we do as a nonprofit organization. It's really takes this full support of our community to get out there and provide service programs to veterans and patients, to support our research programs that help us further knowledge of brain and spine health, injury, and illness, and to continue doing all the education that we do, getting out here, live streaming, helping educate the community, all the professional education that we do, helping to teach and train future bright minds that want to be brain and spine doctors down the road, right? We can't do any of this stuff without the support of our community. So right now, we currently have an ongoing fundraiser between now and February 15th, specifically to help provide financial support for our veteran and service program. So if you give now, between now and February 15th, your funds will 100% be given to our veteran and military service programs. So scan the QR code, text BSG to 44321, go to our website, brainandspinegroup.org. Whatever you need to do to give. If you can't give financially, contact us. Our emails all over the website. Let us know how you want to help in another way, and we're happy to try to find a way to get you involved with our organization to help support brain and spine health for veterans. If you love the channel, the show, and you want to join our YouTube community, that money goes directly to helping us do what we do in our mission, right? That does not support YouTube. That does not support anything outside the organization. That money helps us do what we do. And we really do enjoy having subscribers in our YouTube community. What that does is gives us a very stable form of month-to-month support. It's a small fee. It's $4.99 a month. It's basically nothing. If you look at your credit card statement, you won't even realize it's there. But by making that commitment every month to Brain and Spine Group, it allows us to really build and sustain reliable month-to-month income to fund all of our community service programs. And so let's go ahead and take another question before we completely wrap up. Jade says, if you can answer a question I have, I'd appreciate it on a more personal level so I could, absolutely. Jade, if you want to get in contact with me, just go ahead and send me an email. I answer my email all the time. I'm more than happy to share my personal email. It's all over our website. It's not a secret. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat for you. brainandspinegroup.group, misspelled there, .org. Just go ahead and send me an email. I'd be happy to talk about anything, any question you have. My sincere pleasure. I love engaging with our community. On that note, what do we have scheduled for next week? We have a guest next week, right? February 8th is next week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds right. And anybody who's got ideas for show topics, Bishop actually threw one out there that I think might be fun to dive into. If we talk about hypothetical brain zombie apocalypse possibilities, that could be a show topic. But if you got any ideas for
That
them,
is true. That is
I think
true.
that'd be fun. I think that'd be a lot
That
of fun.
is
We
true.
get severely
How
derailed.
do zombies infect your brain? I
Like
feel like that
how
would be a great show to do before Halloween. But
Halloween.
it's so far away.
I know. So maybe we do. I bet we could do multiple of those.
Maybe we can.
Like realistic viruses that could take over your brain, similar to how they do in insects and stuff like that. That's good for springtime. Eh?
That there are some pretty crazy like funguses that take over like insects' brains.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great show topic. Oh,
Yep.
thanks, Bishop. We'll definitely do that. That's crazy cool topic.
Yep.
I remember learning about that in some of my intro neurobiology classes and just being mind blown by it. 100%.
We do have some great shows coming up, but we're always looking for new ideas.
Yeah.
And tell us your ideas. We will talk about them, or at least try to find a way to talk about them if they're interesting enough, and share the show with your friends.
I think Bishop says, "What's the parasite that messes up cats?" Maybe toxoplasmosis is what you're talking about. I don't know. Toxoplasmosis like transmits through cats. I don't know if it affects cats. Maybe it does, but it can make humans crazy.
Well, there was one there. There's like zombie squirrels.
There's
a lot of like
I've never seen like videos of like zombie
viruses.
ants and stuff. It's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah,
toxo from cat poop. Yeah. Anyway, next week, we have Dr. Roger Hartle from Cornell joining us. Dr. Hartle is a spine neurosurgeon who goes to Tanzania several times a year. He works with neurosurgeons in Tanzania. Originally, it started out as like he was, many years ago, he's like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to help them with all this, these neurosurgical diseases and spine trauma that they have over there. And what he realized in that process was, going over there and helping them is great and rewarding, but it doesn't do anything to help them address the day after day after day after day, like spine trauma that they constantly have every single day that he's not there. And what he's done and what he's made a mission of his career is to, rather than go over to Tanzania with the goal of doing surgery, everything he's created has been about training and teaching surgeons in Tanzania who are going to be there day in and day out to do quality spine trauma surgery. And what he's realized is much aligned with our organization is that if you want to change the world, you don't change the world by doing 1 million surgeries. You change the world by teaching 1 million doctors and future surgeons to do 1 million surgeries. And that's exactly what Dr. Hartle's doing in Tanzania. He's really invested while he does plenty of surgery here in the United States, his outreach, his mission, his goal for improving spine trauma health out in the world is by teaching African neurosurgeons how to do really good spine trauma surgery. And so he goes to Tanzania all the time. He's going to come on the show next week, and we're going to talk about, what his mission is, what his experiences have been. I'm sure anyone who travels to these remote areas of Africa as often as he does has some absolutely crazy stories to tell. I'm excited to get into it. So don't miss it. Join us next week, Wednesday, same time, 7 p.m. Myself
Eastern.
and 7 p.m. Eastern. Myself and Norty will be here picking the brain of Dr. Hartle, asking him what it's like to be running around in Africa, helping locals there learn how to do spine trauma surgery. So don't miss it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's see, before we close out for the night, Jade says, I don't care if you're a doctor or not, but you said you were a physician as long as you have a lot of knowledge and experience. Hey, we appreciate that. I am a physician. I'm early on in my career. I'm not the most experienced person you'll ever meet, but I'm passionate. I love brain and spine health. I'm a trauma specialist because my military background's made me really passionate about that. Josh is a big enthusiast who loves to bring his non-professional experience and keep the conversation fun and exciting for people who aren't doctors, because that's, who we're here for on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. The Rad and Norty show is all about making your brain and spine fun, exciting, interesting, crazy topics to talk about. So please join us next week at the same time, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Anything else before we close out for the night, Norty? I know I just kind of gave, I think, all the highlights of the announcements.
No, I'm excited to have another guest on the show. It sounds like a great cause. I'm interested to talk to him about what he's doing in Tanzania. And, as always, I look forward to these shows, man. It's fun. It's fun to talk about this stuff. I love what you're doing. I love being a part of this. So
we're all in it together. I'm really excited for our new website too, which I'm really hoping we'll have up and running for everyone by February 15th. And I'm sure anybody who works in the tech industry knows that every development project hits its snags. We're just getting through a big snag of the project, but I'm really excited to get that up and running. We're really excited. Jade, I will definitely get back to you as soon as possible. I will try to answer you tonight before we wrap up, but thanks for sending an email. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here for the show, being a part of our community. Really welcome. Welcome to the Brain and Spine Group family. Josh and I are live every Wednesday night. There's another group of individuals from our nonprofit organization that do the Neurosurgery Journey show on Thursday nights, so don't miss that. It's tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. And then most Tuesday nights, we've got an educational seminar at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can always tune in for that. You don't have to be a doctor to join our professional education series. And then sometimes on Saturdays, usually one Saturday a month, we also have an educational stream on some sort of brain or spine topic, usually geared towards professionals. So they're a little more technical, a little harder to understand if you're not a healthcare professional, but you're obviously welcome to join and learn along with us. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close it down for the night. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We really appreciate it. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.